Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Mark Ginsberg is a businessman, an entrepreneur, a passionate supporter of the arts, and a family man. His father and father's family were in the retail business for over 98 years. Mark and his family moved to Iowa City in 1969 when Mark was in 8th grade. He bought Ginsberg Jewelers in 1985 after his father died, eventually renaming the business M.C. Ginsberg Objects of Art. Mark's business supports the arts as enrichment for the whole community. Recently, his store was recognized as one of the top 10 businesses in the United States supporting the arts. That is quite something. Due to his cultural commitments, such as artist in resident and programs for the Iowa City School District, fundraising events for Hancher, founding member of the Iowa City Jazz Festival, sponsor and board member of the Summer of Arts in Iowa City, member of the Iowa Great Places Citizen Advisory Board, and last but not least, hosting a master-level practicum class for University of Iowa metalsmithing students. Mark was awarded for all of this the 2010 Larry Echold Award. This annual Cultural Corridor Alliance Award is given to an advocate for the area's arts. Shortly after taking over his family's business, Mark established the M.C. Ginsberg Fund, which has served the Iowa City community with free exhibitions, public lectures, artist workshops, and community arts events. Mark and his wife, Vicki, they've raised 3 children in Iowa City, Emily, Lizzie, and Alex. Welcome to One of a Kind.
Well, it's tremendous. I'm flattered. Tremendous opportunity.
Well, you're
Thank
awfully
you.
young, and I so love having your story. This is going to be a fun interview. You are. Your story begins in Cedar Rapids in 1957. Tell me about your first family and their influence on you, and your grandfather.
My grandfather. I never met my great-grandfather, who actually started as a pushcart peddler in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and never evolved into a store. But I was raised basically as a retail circus freak. I always thought that, this was the business I would go into and the business I always loved. I didn't think there really was a choice. Being the oldest and the first one born to 9 cousins and brothers and sisters. And
really? I never knew that.
I have 4 brothers and sisters.
Yes.
2 brothers and a sister, and then the rest are cousins, and there's 2 uncles involved, and aunts, of course, and grandparents. And so it was a Gordian knot, so to speak, of family members involved in the jewelry business. Mm-hmm. And my father was the 3rd generation to enter into the business. And family outings, we got together for the holidays, everything revolved around retail. So it was naturally assumed that, the family would follow in the footsteps and that they would continue to expand. In '69, we had the opportunity to open up our 2nd store from Cedar Rapids, and that was in Iowa City. And as Iowa City was redeveloping, the Sycamore Mall was the first mall of its kind actually to be built in this area, and my dad and his brothers felt it was a good opportunity for them, and so they came down here. My dad volunteered to move here. The other 2 brothers stayed in Cedar Rapids. And then we opened a 3rd store in Cedar Rapids, another 4th, and a 5th store in Des Moines. So we had 2 in Des Moines and 2 in Cedar Rapids and 1 in Iowa City.
Now this pushcart, what did he sell in his pushcart?
Pots and pans, rags, burlap, anything he could find that was thrown away that he could clean up, wash, and put back on the street. He went through the garbage, and it never really became the success that my grandfather was. Mm-hmm. My grandfather basically went into the streets when he was in 6th grade, around 12 years old. My great-grandfather had put up my grandfather's brother and sister up for foster care, decided he didn't want to take care of them anymore. which is an interesting story. My grandfather went to work to try to bring them out of foster care so that he could take care of them financially. So he worked the Missouri lines from Council Bluffs down to Sedalia, and he was selling newspapers. And it wasn't until maybe that was, let's see, 1919, 1920, he got enough money to bring his brother and sister out of foster care and take care of them. It wasn't until 26 that a fortune teller told him that he would find his fame and fortune in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Now, why she couldn't have said La Jolla, I don't know, but
Tampa, St. Pete?
something like that. You know, Aspen,
Yes,
BBC, something other than Cedar Rapids. But he moved to Cedar Rapids in 27. That's the year my father was born, and they started to grow the business. And he moved into a physical location. He had a pawn shop. Matter of fact, he started the first Leo Greco hour with WMT, and Leo Greco would play the accordion out of the shop.
Don't know.
He
Before
would play
my time.
That was, yeah, well, 30s, 40s, 50s. I don't know when he started, but in that range, and everybody played the accordion. My dad went to high school in Cedar Rapids and then came to the University of Iowa, played football 4 years here. He was one of the few freshmen that actually played when they had separate freshmen, and then they had the sophomore, junior, and seniors play separately. Actually drafted to the Cleveland Rams at the time and decided, you know, 3 broken noses and multiple broken wrists and arms was enough. It was time to settle down. So that's what he did. And then moved back to Cedar Rapids, and they concentrated on running the business until '69, where they started expanding.
Now, you moved here, I said, when you were in 8th grade. That's not
I was just beginning my 8th grade,
that's
so I
not
just
an
finished
easy
7th.
year.
It's the worst.
It's the worst.
Yeah.
I mean, the peers, it's all set, all the cliques and everything.
Right.
But now, when you went through high school, did you know what you wanted to do? I mean, did you know after high school?
I know that I hated retail.
Okay.
So that was established.
Yes, okay. All right.
I did not want to be in a family business, but you know, I didn't have the academic skill set. I wasn't excelling in math. I wasn't excelling in science. And the one thing that really connected me was music. And that was one thing that I was raised. My mother was more of a free spirit, so I was raised on Joan Baez and Woody Guthrie and Huey Leadbelly and Pete Seeger, and those are the things that I remember growing up. Although our watchmaker at the time had jazz concerts, so it wasn't unusual to have an Art Tatum or Glenn Miller-esque type big bands playing in his living room, and I used to sit and listen to those live recordings. And this was in the late 50s, early 60s, mid 60s. I was 6, 7 years old. So that introduction to music kind of got me tied into music at an early age.
So did you major in music in college?
History.
History.
Yeah, I wanted to stay
Where'd
as
you
far
go?
away here. I graduated from the University of Iowa, but I was at Boulder's extension program, so I traveled around the world on a ship studying history and anthropology, and I was at NYU for a semester, and I was at American University for a semester when I was working for Dick Clark, as a matter of fact. And that's where I met people like Sean Strube and Jim LaRue, and you know, they were working for Culver.
Sure.
And it was an interesting Iowa City dimension.
Connection.
Yeah.
So when did you decide to go into retail?
I didn't really, and I still haven't. So
okay.
I mean, it is that I'm
It
here.
is and it isn't,
Yeah,
yes.
I'm here. My dad got sick in '83, and Vicki and I were living in Chicago, my wife, and it was an emotional decision whether to go completely a different direction. At that point, I was working with the Zale Corp, Bailey, Banks and Biddle, on curating collection. They wanted to start a new division and bringing collectors, elite collectors of vintage jewelry, which is something that I had worked with from the Etruscan Egyptian revival, 1840s up to the retro period. So all I did was work with museums and collectors putting these collections together. Thought that this was a brand new career for me outside of the retail environment. When my dad got sick, Vicki and I had to decide whether we were going to move back and take over the business in Iowa City, separate from the rest of the businesses, or go a different direction. And ultimately I'm here, but we decided to come back and start from scratch.
That's not an easy thing to do. Before we go on in the retail story, how did you meet your wife, Vicki?
At a wedding of my best friend was her first cousin. So we went to most of our college years together, and her cousin used to beat me up in racquetball, and I would always resent that. But you know, we became very good friends. She invited me to her wedding, and that's where she sat me at the same table as Vicki and kept on pairing us together. I thought, what a coincidence!
Yeah. It was meant. The stars were aligned right for you.
But Vicki was working at Wayner Novish, Patron Pfiffner. She's an interior designer, and she got her degree here. And we kept on meeting in some similar places like Hampshire and the music stores, and
there you go.
So we got married a few years after that.
So you decided to rename Ginsberg Jewelers MC Ginsberg Objects of Art.
Right.
Was that a difficult decision, or did it just evolve?
If I could have done something that was completely disconnected from jewelry, I would have. I mean, absolutely disconnected, because I didn't want to have anything to do with the operation in Cedar Rapids or the operation in Des Moines. What I did eventually decide on the MC Ginsberg Objects of Art is because it didn't pigeonhole me or trap me as a jeweler only. It allowed me to grow beyond just the idea of jewelry.
You had lamps and sinks.
We've experimented
and
with everything.
with
you know, back in the early years, we had
dishes.
a Lessie before anybody had it.
Right.
Now you can find it all over the place. It's like hardware store material, but it's, you know, there are a lot of things we experimented with. Gwen Glasser Hayes and the you know, domestic violence intervention program started the first gallery walk in '88, and the Summer of the Arts, and you were on some of those early steering committees with Joyce and with Wally and with some of the other people that are big foundation figures, I mean, in the cultural programming here. But it's been an interesting growth and evolution, you know, trying to kind of de-ascension the retail and reassign the evolution to something that was more of a subversive reconstruction of the business than it was going down the retail path. I completely am trying to wipe out as much as I possibly can, so there's absolutely no original connection to the family. And not because I'm embarrassed of the family, but you know, I'm trying to set up something that people can follow as a legacy, a completely new model.
Tell me, I read that you said I think you said it, that nothing in your store was practical, it was all emotional.
Right. So, I mean, that it dawned on me. The first few years were really difficult, and that's when I met you and John
and Wally.
And Wally. But in particular, you and John, I think, helped me understand the emotional connection and the passion to what I was doing. It left the practical side and the tangible side of the brain void, because it really doesn't make any difference if you want to take a picnic in the middle of the afternoon, fly to New York for dinner, go to a Broadway play, or read a great book, or have a kiss. These are all things we do because we want to, we desire them, not because we need to. I had to disconnect from that left side of my brain, features only, or you know, the size of a diamond and the heft of the gold and everything else that went along with that, and connect to the personal, the passionate, the intangible moment. And then I realized that it's not just a piece of jewelry that I sell, it's a work of art. So the object of art, became part of the name, and early on was part of it. I just had to grow into it. And in '87, we had the opportunity to buy what was then the Hayek's law offices.
That's right.
And we've completely converted the space into something that is more responsive to cultural programming and fundamental giving, and built it in as part of our approach to institutionalized marketing. So instead of radio, newspaper, or TV, we focused on programming to the medals program at the graduate level, or
we're
helping
going to talk
intern.
about that. Yes, I think that's been really satisfying, hasn't it?
Well, I found that, you know, patrons of the arts understand the object as a work of art, not, you know, how many gallons did you use, Mr. Picasso, kind of a thing. So, you know, we're not relegating everything back to its intrinsic elements. It becomes an emotional experience.
But I love that. The things you did in your store, there's nothing practical. It's all emotional.
Right.
That really
Well, and
me.
it helps whoever's coming in as a client understand too that it's not about price, because if you're looking to save money in a piece of jewelry, don't buy it.
Right.
It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
So,
right.
or anything, same thing, a picnic or a nice bottle of wine, or, you know, good food.
I liked you. I read in the research that your ads in the Hampshire Bulletin gave your business a boost, and that you had a relationship with then the director Wally Chappell.
Yeah. Wally was very instrumental in helping direct the way I think about advertising. I couldn't afford TV or radio or newspaper at the time, not to advertise on a consistent basis. Hanscher's audience was large for me. I didn't know who it was speaking to necessarily, but I went to, at that time, Gary Gennade was the design manager, and asked them if I could have the outside back cover. They had just, Walken Foos had just left, Wally had come in, and they expanded the playbill from a narrow playbill to the full-size playbill that it is today. And the back cover was the foundation. And so I asked Gary if I could have the back cover, and he said, no, that goes to the University of Iowa Foundation. And I said, well, how much are they paying? And he said, nothing. And I said, well, I can give you that. He didn't think it was a joke. So he said, well, it's not for sale. And I said, I'll give you $20,000. Every time I advertised on that back cover, I sold everything. And those early years, I would tie in a straight line deco bracelet with a Lorette masked painting. And the next year with a Purrington tapestry, et cetera, and I went down the line and had artists do their work around the pieces. And so I had Wendell Castle or Albert Paley and
Merkel Hess.
Mary Merkel Hess.
I love her.
She did the pearls. And so it was interesting. I would tie the art so that people understood the metaphor between jewelry, don't ask me the price, and art, I never ask the price. It's just, I love this Diebenkorn, I'll buy it, you know, kind of thing. So those are the kind of responses I was looking for. Difficult in jewelry. People still think of it as intrinsic, as utilitarian. And to this day, I fight that stereotype. But in any case, I continue to plod along trying to figure out how to do other things besides, you know, represent or sell beautiful jewelry, work with antique or vintage or estate pieces, and we're expanding way beyond the jewelry market.
And tell the viewers about these students who are doing practicums in your third floor, is it?
Second.
Second floor.
So we had, the second floor was tabletop. It was all flatware, china, crystal, then we went down the porcelain direction. All these things were very inventory-laden directions for me, and as a result represented kind of a binding of sorts, a noose, you know, a golden anchor. I don't know how you want to characterize it, but when you buy the inventory, the desire is to sell everything you have, but it's a guessing game, like fashion. You know, are people going to like this next year? Or
how many weddings? How many weddings?
And as internet took hold, the tabletop and the bridal world became less relevant, at least the physical plants. People would come in, they'd hold it, they'd look at it, the mother and the daughter, or the mother and the daughter-in-law would come in and they'd play with it, and then they'd order online. Because online ordering, you could save money because there was nobody to help you.
Right.
So it didn't make sense for me to carry that anymore. We started picking up more interns with the metals program, and then we picked up interns with other departments. And the interesting thing for us was, as that began to evolve, there was a whole new way of thinking. So now the practicums involve, and not really practicums anymore, they're residencies. I have biomedical and studio arts and business and physics, so that we're actually putting disparate teams of thinkers with low associative properties. So it's not vertically integrated anymore. It's not just biomedical engineers talking amongst biomedical engineers. Now we have biomedical engineer talking to a studio artist for a solution for a pediatric trachea. Those kind of things are evolving out of that space. And the dimension that it adds to the skill set that you have graduating today in studio arts or in engineering gives you a much more horizontal or breadth of experience working with somebody that thinks differently than you. Because ultimately, this is where I want to go, is I want arts to be refunded back into the public programs. I want art not to be looked at as something that's a luxury. It is absolutely a necessity to thinking and solution. And for that reason, we continue to stay tied to arts as a practical economic motivator for a community or a state or a nation or internationally.
Do they get university credit?
Some of the, we're trying to work through that right now, and I've been working with the deans of the programs on putting together a separate facility outside of academics so that they can get independent study or independent credits. Working through risk management, working through the different departments, and working through budgets is causing some brain damage, but
it's a journey.
It is a journey. I don't expect that I'll finish it in my lifetime, but hopefully.
You're on the path. You're on the path. Right. I want to shift a bit from your retail, your store, to all of your community arts commitments. For again, for viewers new to Iowa City, How did this Iowa Jazz Festival, what was the genesis of the festival? And it's become, what's 20 years now?
It's going on 22 now.
22?
Yeah.
And it's become noteworthy, very popular.
One of the top 50 international jazz programs by Jazz Beat or Downbeat magazine in the world. And it's still free. So we run a budget between 60 and 150,000 depending on the artist every year. It's a 3-day event. The first year was an accident, very fortuitous for me and everybody else, I think, that's come in connection with it. But when coming back from Chicago, having lived in LA, having lived in DC and Boston and New York, there were street musicians all over the place, in the subway system, on the corners, in the parks. In Iowa City, it was barren, almost sterile. And when I first started doing it, we were shut down consistently, by the police. And ultimately, I started doing the events in front of the physical plant that we have downtown right now in '87. And it started off as blues and jazz. We had tap, we had dance, we had one-act plays, bell ringers. We tried everything. And ultimately, on the 5th or 6th time I was shut down, the police picked me up and brought me in, and I asked them, I said, give me a way to do this that's a solution. So I had to go visit with Steve Atkins, and he said, well, you need a sound permit. I said, you couldn't have just said that in advance of hauling me in. I wasn't in handcuffs, but it wasn't pleasant, I can tell you that.
Sure.
And I was upset, but in any case, they said, you need a permit. I said, well, how much? And they said, it's $25. I think, there's no way that I can do this, because I was 120 times a year that I have the music. I said, I can't, 120 times 25, it doesn't work for me. He said, that's 25 a year.
25 a year.
So
I think you could manage that.
That I managed.
That you managed.
So then I thought to myself, if you're going to market yourself, if you're going to be visible, then you've got to make the physical location visible. Think of it as a billboard. It's organic, it's living, it's fluid, people could interact with it. Long before the internet had taken hold, long before people had actually, this is more of an old way of thinking in the retail world in the 30s, 40s, 50s, when people actually used to interact and used to engage in conversation. The music did that. And I turned to Steve Grismore, who was the associate of the Jazz Studies program. Paul C.A. was the head of the Jazz Studies program at the time, and said, I'd love to do a festival. He said, if you produce it, I'll get the acts. And the first festival was held on that berm in front of Whitey's. We built a stage above it, and it was $2,500 that first year, which it was a lot for me at the time because it was just a beginning business. But we had 200-300 people. Paul Smoker was the headliner, kind of a Louis Armstrong on acid, and it's very interesting. But we had
moving on from that.
Yeah, it was very good. It was exceptional, and really what it did is it laid the groundwork for the future festivals of pushing the extreme of the medium. And people wouldn't necessarily characterize jazz anymore as elevator music. And from that point forward, we moved the jazz festival several times. We had to get the city to agree to close the streets, and they gave us 3 times: Memorial Day, the 4th of July weekend, and Labor Day. And we chose the 4th because the town was empty and there was nothing going on. So out of the jazz festival and the music that was played in front of the shop, grew the Friday night concert series. Steve and I handled that for about 2.5 years, 3 years, and then the DTA and Press Citizen took it over, which was fine because the programming part of it was a little onerous. I mean, we just couldn't do everything and do the programming. And then we had the Gallery Walk, of course, was going, and that was I don't know if you remember those early years when they used to stuff 70 artists into the top floor, and it was just, there was no place to move.
That was very smart to spread it out.
Spread it out, right.
It's good for the retail people. It's good for people to stroll around on a summer's night.
There were 5 of us. Iowa Artisans, it was the Johnson County Art Center at the time, Barn, which was the Weinsteins, Iowa State Bank, and me. Is that 5?
Yeah,
I think so. Okay. And we ran the Gallery Walk for 10 years or so before there were other retailers.
Senior Center, I think, wasn't the Senior
Senior wasn't in it at that time.
Oh, wasn't it then?
Not yet.
Okay,
it was the
all
Johnson
right.
County, which was below the Jefferson Building at the time.
Okay, all right.
And
oh, yes, that's right.
Before they moved out.
Right.
And that was it. And it was a blast, and we had a good time, and we ran it 3 times a year, which we still do, but we would get somewhere between 500 and 1,500 people a night coming through.
Are you drawing from the whole corridor, now that we all call it the corridor, from Cedar Rapids to Iowa City, or is it mostly Iowa City people? Can you tell?
There are a lot of people now from Cedar Rapids, but we used to get a lot more people early on from Quad Cities and Muscatine in that area. Not as much from Cedar Rapids, and even some from the Des Moines area. Fairfield didn't have their First Fridays. Des Moines didn't have the East Village, so we were kind of on the, on our own on this.
As I said also in the introduction, your business, which is small compared to a lot of the business across the United States, you won this award for your commitment to the arts. That must have really pleased you. But tell the audience that you thought it was maybe.
I thought it was a joke.
A joke,
yeah,
yes.
Because you get so many solicitations, and after being in business for a fair amount of time, and after being a patron of arts, and people find you,
Sure.
and you know what it feels like.
Yes.
So I thought to myself, well, here's a way to support arts in America. When I saw this, send in, buy an ad in this periodical. I threw it away. And then I kept on getting emails that, you've won this award, we'd like you to respond, it's a black tie affair, Central Park, the Boathouse. I threw it away. And then I got a...
And who is they? Who is
the Business Committee for the Arts, which was endowed by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Forbes family. Wow. So the Forbes family funded the original program, and with the idea of stimulating businesses to stay focused on arts production and grant giving and economic stimulus. So even small businesses, we had been giving a fair amount of our net profits every year to programming throughout the state and throughout the city of Iowa City. So when we won the award, I was a little surprised that we actually hit the radar, because when they listed some of the other participants, it was Walmart, Blue Cross Blue Shield, ConocoPhillips, Houston Oil. Wow. So well, that's
WOW, exclamation mark.
I didn't take it.
So when did you finally realize it was for real?
I got an email from Sandy Boyd. For those who don't know, the past president of the University of Iowa and the executive director at the Field Museum in Chicago, and quite well known and well respected, and he congratulated me. I said, for what? He said, for winning the Business Committee and the Arts Award and being one of the smallest recipients ever to get this award. I mean, John Papajohn actually was a recipient as well. Obviously, you know the kind of collection and pockets that he has.
Right.
So I said, you mean it's for real? And he said, yes, for real. And I bought this was about a week in advance of the event. I bought a ticket, my wife didn't even go, went to New York and got the award. And the interesting thing is that I was dancing with the stars for leukemia lymphoma on that Saturday. The award was Thursday. So I went in Thursday morning, I received the award on Thursday night along with the other recipients, came home Friday and danced on Saturday. And so, I danced with you too. So I got my tux, I wiped off my sweat.
And there you were.
So,
that's a great, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Well deserved.
It's a community, I think. It really, I accept it on behalf of the entire community, because it's, if it weren't for this city, if it weren't for the school, the culture, and the academics, and I can't speak for you, but I would not be in this state. And whether it's the state of Iowa or the state of euphoria or the cultural state of mind, all of the above, I wouldn't be here. I'd be someplace else. But Iowa City speaks to me personally and emotionally, and it means something. I mean, you can make an impact.
Who made an impact on you? Who made a difference in your life? And where did this passion for the arts, where do you think you got that from?
My dad really upset me once when he said, stick your hand in a bucket of water and see what kind of hole it makes. It used to really irritate me, because of course you don't leave any hole when you take your hand out of a bucket of water. And so you're saying I have no impact in life? I mean, that my existence here is not worth anything. So my mother used to say, no, that's not what he means. Take a look at the water and see what happens. And I said, what? It's moving around? She goes, ripples. It's tides. It's moving out from the center. So those dots that it connects to, those atoms that those ripples are connecting to, make an impact, regardless of how big or small they are. So I'd have to say that both of my parents influenced early on. One aggravated me, one kind of soothed me down. But those two in twain. But I also had some great mentors in my married life with my father-in-law, Marvin Pomerantz, and my mother-in-law, Rose Lee. Very philanthropic, always giving, sometimes controversially, but always stimulating. And I think, to me, that's what art does. It provokes. If it's if it doesn't provoke, it doesn't stir you, you don't notice it. To me, it's wallpaper. So I always wanted to do something in my life that had an impact and maybe stirred some controversy or at least provoked a discussion.
I read what you wrote to I think it was the Press Citizen, maybe Gazette. You said that you're envisioning a new paradigm for.
Right.
Is it for Iowa City or for the corridor? Or
I think this is for the globe.
For the globe.
Right. Yeah.
Explain
So I'm
what
not
you
thinking
mean.
myself in terms of a neighborhood business or a statewide business or a regional business. What I'm trying to do is bring disparate thought processes into one room and be able to, for lack of a better word, franchise that to other communities, either communities that are blighted because they've lost all their youth or that can't reinvent their manufacturing or those things have been exported to other countries. It dawned on me that it doesn't make sense to pay somebody 30 cents a day with no bathroom breaks when we can reinvent the skill set and the people that we come in contact with. So over the last 10 years or so, we've been purchasing equipment that isn't used exclusively for jewelry. We're rapid prototyping, doing proof of concepts on things as far away from jewelry as pediatric tracheas, so that surgeons can do practice work before they actually cut the child open, or distractors for vertebrae, or we're doing vessel studies with the biomedical area. But the interesting thing is as we bring additional thought processes into, you would think it's just an engineering problem or challenge and a solution, but it becomes artistic as well, part of the solution. And I'll give you, for instance, we had an electrical engineer was making solar panels, small solar panels. So they produced 10 watts of power, hardly enough to light a flashlight, but about that amount of energy. And then I introduced the man to a studio artist, and she was making ABS plastic maple leaves. The two of them got together and they were embedding the solar panels on either side of the maple leaf. Now what do you do? Well, they thought if they put each one of these maple leaves on the side of a building, it looks like ivy. Well, in addition to having an aesthetic approach, it takes the building off the energy grid and it produces enough energy to do their whole heating, ventilating, and air conditioning system. So here is one possible solution. Another one that was interesting from engineering to studio arts is I had a friend who was making cello bridges, and another a sound engineer that was looking for a pure sound. Well, a musician knows there's no such thing as a pure tone. There's no pure G. There's a G, if Yo-Yo Ma wants a G that bends to his voice. Jimi Hendrix wants a G that bends to his voice. Janis Joplin, her voice. So the idea was if I could build a bridge, so thought the studio artist, I could figure out how to try to change the tonal quality of the note. And he met the electrical or sound engineer through our residency space, and they're building cello bridges that can translate to guitars and translate to violins and violas, etc.
It's all in collaboration.
All in collaborative work. And the idea is that, typically we pair doctors with doctors. We pair biomedical with biomedical, but we don't pair biomedical with comparative literature or poetry with studio arts or, film studies with physics. And interesting, little thought process begin to evolve because the associative properties are so low that they have no expectations from one another. And all of a sudden you've broken down the barriers of solution and you've opened up these innovations and intersections that have infinite possibilities.
And surprise.
So that's the new paradigm. For us to manufacture within the United States, for us to, revitalize communities that are dying or dead, and so that's the new direction.
Exciting.
It is exciting.
I think people might be a little surprised that you're rather a reclusive person. I know you're your family man first and foremost, but is your reclusiveness, is that by temperament, or is that just because you're always, in retail it's very draining, but are you by temperament reclusive?
I'm easy to get along with when you meet me, but I really enjoy time to be bored. And that to me is important for me to revitalize or recharge my batteries. And whether, for me, I enjoy cutting wood, stacking wood, something that is really inane and boring, but I remember reading the Dalai Lama. He said, you Americans, find no time to bore yourself, and as a result, there's a loss of creativity. So it gives me time to think. I'm not a big socializer in parties. I find that I get in trouble sometimes.
By what you say.
What I do, what I say, you know. So I think if I don't put myself into those situations, then I'm safer. But I also, I think it's okay to want more of somebody, you know, that they're not easily accessible. But you can get me. Anybody who wants me, if I'm in town or if I'm in my space downtown, I'm happy to share myself.
Here's a personal question. You have 3 children. I said, what are they? Where are they, and what are they about?
Well, it's, you know, all of us go through this. We can't figure out as parents, how can we, you know, raise these kids in the same roof with, you know, in the same dynamic, and they're all so completely different. I mean, how's that happen?
Well, look at your siblings, you know.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
And I can't figure that out either. But, you know, some are motivated more or less, and, you know, by different things. Obviously, there's a strong influence in art in all my kids. Although my son is getting an economics and marketing degree, I can't figure out where he got that.
He's rebelling.
My oldest daughter graduated in theater management and has always been involved in music. She's now the public relations director for a company called Pipeline out of Kansas City, and they produce outdoor festivals primarily, but she travels constantly. And my middle daughter is finishing a BFA in industrial design, 3D design. And I think a lot of that came from her mother, but, you know, some influence with me, and we're oil and vinegar. But or water, or because oil and vinegar actually go well together. But we're both very passionate and intense people. And my son is more like his mother, very serene, contemplative, thoughtful, very sweet, and he's going. You know, he plays guitar. He has you know, a very artistic streak to him, but more in line with business.
You have a theme in your family of culture, art, music, you know, ceramics, jewelry. I mean,
yeah, I think that, you know, and you have found this. So I look at mentors like you as, you know, people that I've surrounded myself in my life as friends who I love. You know, I hope it's okay if I call you my friend.
Yep, of course.
That, you know, I try to emulate, and I see buildings named or shows or things that you've done in the wake that you've left for people to learn from and be inspired by. And those things continue to hopefully inspire my children and future generations. And honestly, from almost an egotistical standpoint, you hope that you become immortal. You hope that your work is never finished, so that somebody takes up that banner. And I think it was Henry Moore who said, you know, there's got to be a task that makes us want to wake up every morning, makes us get up and go to the next level, but something we can never possibly finish. So that just keeps us motivated until we're not here anymore. And I think that hit me as something that I'd like to do.
What a story. I love your enthusiasm. I love your passion. And I'm so happy you live in Iowa City. And thank you for being the guest today on One of a Kind.
All right.
My guest on One of a Kind has been the businessman and cultural and arts supporter, Mark Ginsberg. Mark firmly believes that art makes a community. Words used to describe my guest are a dedicated family man, innovative, energetic, entrepreneurial, creative, and very generous. Mark Ginsberg is one of a kind.